Okay, well, good morning, everyone. Glad to see that you are here. Thank you very much for coming, by the way. My name is Chris Chinnock. I'm with Insight Media, and we're going to hopefully have a really nice day today of learning and discussion, so please do feel free to be vocal. So this workshop is being put together by Insight Media, us. If you don't know us, we're a consultancy, and we focus on a lot of advanced display and imaging technologies. I do a lot of writing of articles and white papers and help put together events like this. The Air Force Research Lab is also supporting this work. Obviously, they're interested in light fields from a DoD perspective, and they've funded a number of initiatives in that area, some of which will be discussed today. Third Dimension Technologies is also part of the organization that's putting together this workshop. Tommy Thomas is here, as well as the rest of the crew, Steve and Paul. So you'll hear from them later today. And Oak Ridge National Laboratories, you probably know of them as the Energy Research Institute. Well, they're also doing a lot of work with big data. And big data is obviously, they think, a very keen application for being able to have a light field display visualize that data in more meaningful ways. So that's why they have an interest in this as well. So AFRL, the Air Force Research Lab, has identified a number of issues that they see, which has basically driven this workshop here. And by the way, these presentations, we plan to post them up on the website after the event sometime next week, so you don't really have to take photos of every slide, unless you really want to. They've identified the fact that 3D sensor data is rapidly increasing, and we are pretty much aware of this. And there's a lot of different types of sensor data, LiDAR, SAR, Planoptic. I'll show some more of that a little bit later, as well as 3D models for all kinds of applications. So that's a critical trend that they're seeing. 3D visualization needs to improve, and that's a key driver for productivity in a lot of applications and creativity in some applications as well. But they certainly see stereoscopic 3D is not adequate at this point, and that's primarily driven by the need to have eyewear. So, and the eyewear-free solutions are not adequate for them as well. So, therefore, the interest in light fields and other advanced imaging technologies and display technologies. But there's a key bottleneck that they see right now, and that's the lack of standardization in the whole streaming model. There are acquisition systems, there are some initial display systems, but all the stuff in between is all custom and proprietary. And that's a hindrance for commercialization. So standards would help. So there are objectives. This program is structured as an SBIR, a Small Business Innovation Research contract. It's a small contract, but they do have some specific objectives. And Oak Ridge National Laboratory and Third Dimension Display Technologies are the awardees of the contract. So that's how this workshop is happening. And so there's some objectives from the contract and from this workshop specifically, and these are the bullets that I've listed here. So the idea is to develop a display-agnostic 3D streaming media model. Display-agnostic 3D streaming model. And that includes the ability to have some kind of screen description, a scene description in a transmission format. It must allow for a flow and point of view control. It must be optimized for not just a light field display or some other advanced display, but also for stereoscopic and 2D displays. And most importantly, at least from the DoD perspective, they want this to be an open standard. The government, the military cannot pay royalty fees. So this is very important, again, from their point of view. So today we're going to hear, hopefully hear a lot about light field displays. We got a few presentations on that. We're going to hear about light field capture and creation as well as distribution and display. We're going to get an update on the standardization efforts and all this stuff. I mean, this agenda is more than one day, so we're going to have as much as we can do in one day anyway. And we're also here to gather some feedback for the technical report that this team needs to put together regarding this workshop. And the rationale for that is that there is a Phase 2 award that will be coming after this Phase 1 SBIR. And so we want to be able to get that Phase 2 award and continue this work. And there, as also part of that, there's the idea of maybe creating a consortium or an association that would help support the standardization effort and perhaps the commercialization effort as well. So we want to try and understand if that's needed and what mission such a consortium might have. But that's clearly an area of discussion that we want to explore. So I grabbed this chart from the JPEG Plano ad hoc working group document, which Paul cleaned up very nicely. And I think it's a nice document that kind of gives you the whole system workflow at a very high level block diagram point of view. So I didn't bring my laser pointer. It's not easy to drag over there, but I think you can see the major blue blocks: sense, convert, encode, decode, render, and present, with a backwards path going from the end user with interaction commands that can decide the point of view and the flow, etc. And those can go potentially anywhere backstream. And then coming in at all these points are data and metadata. So the way I kind of simplistically view this is the standards activity should focus on where those interfaces are. We would like to have several, maybe one, formats in each of these circled areas that is standardized to allow the free exchange of information and metadata between those block diagrams. And then within those blocks, this structure allows each company and organization to provide their own innovations and secret sauce within those blocks. I mean, you need to be able to do that, right? Everyone has to have their own abilities to innovate, but you also want to have some standardizations as well. And again, my simplistic thinking is that's the standardization part should be the interfaces between these innovation blocks. There are a number of 3D data types. I'm sure most of you are aware of these. We've got light field data, traditional light field data of planoptic cameras, camera arrays, or moving cameras. We can create depth maps from time of flight or structured light cameras. And then, by the way, this is not an exhaustive list. It's just some 3D data types. We've got point clouds. We've got synthetic aperture radar type information, and then a whole bunch of digital formats, 3D meshes with and without textures, CAD data, planar primitives. You've got voxels from volumetric information, and then let's not forget things like medical data, slice data, MRI and CT. All of these types of data sources can potentially benefit from a light field display. That's a lot of data types. We're going to hear a lot more about the standards activities. So again, I just kind of give you a brief high-level overview of some of the activity that's going on. There's clearly a lot of activity in MPEG. There's got to be 3 or 4 related, maybe more, groups within MPEG. At least one specifically focused on light field, but there are some related things in compression as well as VR that do have a lot of overlap. That we want to try and understand, and Arian will tell us more about that a little bit later today. SMPTE is also active in this area. Howard Luck will be here. I don't see Howard right now, but he'll be here later to tell us about that. The JPEG Plano group, they've also published a very nice report, and we'll hear a little bit more about that. And then there are a whole bunch of other things in the Chromium, WebGL, Open3D, GC, that I don't know as much about, that unfortunately I could not get a representative here to tell us more about that for this meeting. But we do have someone to talk to us about from the VR interest group that is soon to become the VR Forum. And they have a similar mission to help with the standardization and commercialization and education, but focused on the VR area. Now, I think most of you would agree that VR is probably one of the biggest near-term applications for light field capture and display, and so there's going to be a lot of overlap. This is also from that JPEG Plano group. I'm not going to try and go through this. The point I'm trying to make here is this group has really done some very good thinking about how to categorize and organize some of the activities and categories of activity, and they put it together in categories and functionality and data representation and coding tools to try and get their arms around these various activities as kind of a starting point to try to tackle the problem, essentially. So I don't think, they certainly do not have a recommended solution at this point, but they're trying to look at this thing from a pretty grand scheme, is at least my impression anyway, to try and get their arms around the problem at the big level and then start to focus down on specific tasks. Field of light displays. People call them field of light or light field. And I think if I asked everyone in this room their definition of a light field display, I'd get 20 different definitions. So at least my working definition kind of fits these bullet points. No vergence accommodation issues. Obviously, we know this is a big problem for eye strain, so that becomes a non-issue with a good light field class display. I think you want to have at least horizontal parallax, ideally vertical parallax. And again, ideally, you create images that are perceptually indistinguishable from reality. And we've, at the SMPTE conference, heard a lot of discussions about that. So we have that goal here as well. In terms of implementation, standalone and eyewear, standalone displays and eyewear are kind of the classic ones right now. And these applications span a wide range of commercial, military, government, and consumer applications. I didn't put consumer on there, but it does. 3D or fold types. Again, you can look at how to organize these display categories in any number of different ways. Back in the 3D days when I was involved in the 3D at Home Consortium, we created a kind of an organization chart of and hierarchy of 3D technologies. I kind of borrowed a little bit from that to use these categories of holographic and multi-view and volumetric. And then within each of those are a number of subcategories based on architectures, physical architectures. And this is just some of them and some of the players. There are many more. And in fact, I was motivated to add this slide this morning. How many of you saw this exhibit over in the Centennial Hall at the SMPTE event this week? Yeah, so this is the centennial anniversary of SMPTE. 100 years ago, Jenkins formed the organization, and we learned that this organization was formed because it was World War I. There were multiple types of cameras out there gathering battlefield information, video information, cinematic information, multiple types of projectors, and none of these things could talk to each other. So this was a real big problem from a military intelligence point of view, but it was also a hindrance for the movie industry going forward. So Jenkins, that was the motivation to start SMPTE back in 1916, and they had this really wonderful list of products, machines that had the word scope or graph in them. I didn't count these, but there's got to be 80 or 100 products, right? Well, it kind of looks the same 100 years later, doesn't it? We're talking light fields now, however. And we don't have a war, but we certainly have the standardization issues here at this point. So history is repeating itself. In terms of applications, we all know cinema and video is going to be interesting. Telepresence is also a very fascinating potential here for light field displays and capture. Design of advanced equipment like autos and aircraft and even buildings is going to be very important. VR, AR, MR clearly on the horizon right now. Situational awareness, and this is again more from a military and commercial aviation and aircraft control point of view, but very important. And this has been one that's been on the table for at least 25, 30 years to find solutions for this. I mentioned big data a little bit earlier, so those are things like satellite data and oil and gas and pharmaceutical visualization, scientific visualization, huge data sets that need to be better understood, and then, of course, some of the medical modalities. So there's a lot of potential applications here. I thought of one possible consortium mission statement, which we can talk about a little bit later. Facilitate development of open streaming standards of true 3D data to all 3D and 2D displays by providing liaison between interested parties to share information, provide education, and work to bridge gaps in the standardization process. It's kind of generic, but it's designed to help foster to move the process forward. What would such a consortium might do? Again, this consortium would potentially be formed under a Phase 2 SBIR and potentially provide these kinds of services. So what might this consortium do? Help write reports for education documents and work with the standards committees. We might broaden the range of applications that are being considered by the standards organizations to include some of these DoD and government applications specifically, because this is an AFRL funded project. Their interests need to be represented. We could write newsletters, white papers, education things, again, all to help facilitate the education of the industry and the community, standards organizations, et cetera. There could be some additional tasks we would consider, like metrology. I'm not sure there's been much thought about that yet. We could continue to have these kinds of meetings, events, and maybe exhibits. And then even potentially identify key areas of research that would be fundamental research that would help the industry. Again, from the 3D at Home Consortium experience, we did some of that stuff. We helped gather some of the academic information. We put together vocabularies. We funded some fundamental research. So there is some value potentially in doing that. So I mentioned the funding a little bit. So all this, this is a Phase 1. The second part would be a Phase 2. And after that, we'd have to maybe consider other financial structures if the consortium mission was still viable and wanted to continue. Agenda. So I'm going to finish up in just a minute. We got John Carafin coming on after that from Lyctro. We got Siegfried from Fraunhofer, and then we got a whole session on displays with Lloyd, Tommy, and Thomas. We've got 3 speakers covering standards in JPEG, MPEG, and SMPTE. Then we're going to hear from OTOY and the VR Industry Forum. And then we're going to wrap up this afternoon with a panel discussion talking about some of the things that we've learned today and maybe some of the consortium-related issues. Please wear your badges if you have them, and do something with your cell phone so we don't disturb folks. In terms of format, we've got about 20 minutes for each speaker, and there is 5 minutes allocated for Q&A. I do encourage you to ask questions. This is your workshop. And so we'll try and keep to the schedule. We have a little bit of flexibility in it, but we do want to try and keep the schedule for the most part. And I mentioned before, the presentations will be available for download. And Mauricio also mentioned on the Wi-Fi, the SMPTE meeting SSID is still valid. I'm sorry, it's the Lowe's meeting is the SSID, and the password is SMPTE 2016, all lowercase. And with that, I think I am done. John Carafin, please come up.